Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, the Prime Minister is in Norway this evening, there to take in a joint military exercise above the Arctic Circle, and then later this weekend to take part in a summit with Nordic leaders. But ahead of both those events, the Prime Minister also had the chance to meet with his Norwegian and German counterparts today, and also had discussions, most probably included talk about a potential submarine contract, most definitely included talk about defense cooperation among middle powers.
We're all investing heavily in our defense and security, and we all recognize that we are much stronger together. Stronger together when we cooperate in areas such as space, cooperate in defense, but also cooperate with other like-minded nations, and there's no better illustration than Operation Cold Response.
The Prime Minister from earlier today in Norway. Well, to talk about this trip, we're now joined by Wendy Gilmour. From 2022 to 24, Ms. Gilmour was seconded to NATO, where she served as Assistant Secretary General for Defense Investment. She has a distinguished record as a Canadian diplomat and these days sits on the board of directors for the Conference of Defense Associations Institute, upon which she serves as Vice Chair. Ms. Gilmour, thank you for being with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So here we have the Prime Minister this evening in Norway, and that's where I want to begin our discussion, because I'm hoping you can put this visit into some context for us, because obviously it comes, yes, to watch NATO exercises, but also takes place as the Prime Minister meets with allies and talks about middle powers needing to step up in this moment of global history.
I mean, the most important thing about his visit right at the moment is that it is a demonstration that Canada remains firmly committed to NATO and to working with our Nordic partners in particular. I think it's part of a constant refrain by Prime Minister Carney and his government that they want to work more closely with Europe in defence cooperation. We saw the conclusion of a Canada-EU defence cooperation agreement. We are part of the SAFE agreement, which is rebuilding and European defence capabilities, and at the same time we're making significant investments into our own. So that's it's important for Canada to be visible and to be present, to remind European partners that we are still there.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that, because you talk about defense cooperation and investments, and certainly this trip comes just weeks after the Prime Minister unveiled this country's new defense industrial policy. It comes as, he looks to Northern Defense, making the announcements as he did yesterday in Yellowknife. And really there's two things out of that I want to talk about. The first has to do with tone, because reputationally, Canada is known for stepping up with things like Ukraine and taking part in international missions when called upon, but at the same time does not have the best track record when it comes to military procurement, domestic investment into defense in this country. Now that the language around it has changed in this last year, what has been the response to that from our allies?
It's not just the language that's changed, it's dollars against real commitments. And I think that's what our allies are looking for. They have seen Canada be one of the slowest to implement plans to get to the 2% of GDP that NATO countries agreed in 2014. The fact that the Prime Minister announced in June that we would get to 2% in year, and with every likelihood that is happening, and we see the expenditures happening right now, into the real, the baseline capabilities, getting the forces back to where they should be. And then at the same time, we had last summer the announcement by the Prime Minister that Canada would join other NATO nations in moving to 5% of GDP, which is 3.5% of hard military capabilities and 1.5% of dual-use infrastructure, which is what we saw yesterday up in the north. So I think it's really important that the Prime Minister has gone to Norway now, immediately following a visit to Yellowknife. Yes, I think our Yukon colleagues are not so happy that they weren't part of this announcement. Yeah. But in Yellowknife, the announcements on dual-use runways, the port facility, land corridors that will actually create the first ever highway through the Northwest Territories and into Nunavut, that's what our partners are looking for. So these projects are, as I understand, shovel ready, And what they will be looking for is like, okay, are we getting on with them and actually doing now what we've announced?
Well, that leads me to my other question, because we've seen announcements, but for example, the projects announced yesterday to be forwarded to the major projects office, it's being forwarded to the MPO. It's not necessarily the actual announcement of the start of a project. What kind of speed do the Allies expect of Canada, or are hoping to see out of Canada?
So I think, first and foremost, our allies expect certain things of us. I think the Canadian public expects even more of the government. And the projects that were announced yesterday, my understanding is that nothing goes to the major projects office unless it is ready to move. I mean, when I say shovel ready, there have been plans in place to build these gravel highways, to get things underway. Our allies are looking to see, okay, are we actually doing what we say we're doing? They're also having issues with establishing, their own infrastructure projects. They're also having issues with restarting their own defense industrial base. So I think they are sympathetic to how complicated some of these questions are. But they're really looking to Canada to deliver the capabilities that we commit to NATO, and they are looking to Canada to continue to be, frankly, a good ally and partner, which is not what we're seeing, unfortunately, at the moment from the United States.
Mm-hmm. And to that, as I said, the Prime Minister will be meeting with the Nordic leaders later this weekend, then on his way to the UK to meet the British Prime Minister as well as the King. R.J. Simpson's actually going to come up after you. He's going to ask him about how shovel-ready those projects actually are.
It'll be interesting to hear.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear. But before you and I are done, I do want to get, given your experience, I want to get your reaction to what we heard today from the U.S. White House. The fact that they're going to lift sanctions off of Russia to allow Russian oil back into the marketplace, a direct result to the oil shortage that has now been caused by the conflict in Iran. I want you to take a listen right now to what the Prime Minister had to say about the lifting of these sanctions earlier today while he was in Norway.
Okay, thank you.
Canada's position is to maintain sanctions on Russia, maintain sanctions including on the Shadow Fleet, which is moving this oil. There's been very tight cooperation between Russia and Iran at great cost to the people of Ukraine, and a great threat to peace and security in Europe. And this group, under the leadership of the two gentlemen to my right, and a broader coalition of the willing, has stood up to that.
And really, that shows the interconnectivity of this world. Here we have a conflict in Iran, the United States and Israel striking Iran a couple of weeks ago. That leads to Russian sanctions being lifted on oil. The trade of Russian oil sends money to the Kremlin. That helps fund the Kremlin's war against Ukraine. I'm wondering what your reaction is to this move on behalf of the United States, what you think it might actually do to global security.
I find it astonishing, and it, to me, is an illustration of how poorly thought through this current attack on Iran is, and the fact that in rushing to bomb Iran, the United States in particular doesn't seem to have thought through the second and third and fourth order effects. And in particular, the impact on the Straits of Hormuz, the impact on getting petroleum products to market. It's not just oil, it's also fertilizer inputs, of which a significant proportion comes out of the Gulf. It is tactical decisions on the part of the White House that are having long-term strategic effect. And it is criminal, in my view. I gather the lifting of the sanctions is supposed to be time-bound, 30 days. It's supposed to be explicit to those ships that are already at sea, many of which were being searched for and stopped because they are part of Russia's Shadow Fleet. But the idea that we are allowing more revenue into the Russian market that will contribute to war aims, that even the United States is providing support for Ukraine. They are working directly against their own interests, as well as clearly against the interests of the people of Ukraine.
Well, we are watching the situation as this conflict goes on. As you say, we're watching these, unexpected complications as a result. But for now, Wendy Gilmour, thank you very much for the time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.